Have you ever walked out of a language test just scratching your head, wondering what on earth they were actually grading you on? Well, today, we're going to peel back the layers and take a look behind the curtain of spoken language tests to see what's really going on. Okay, let's get into it. It all boils down to this one huge question. Speaking isn't like a math problem where there's one right answer, right? It's alive, it's interactive, it's messy. So how do you possibly pin that down and stick a fair, consistent score on it? That's the puzzle every single test designer is trying to solve. So to even begin to get our heads around that, we first need to break down what speaking actually means, at least in a test. You can think of it like a puzzle with a few essential pieces that all have to click together just right. And that puzzle basically has two big halves. On one side, you've got your productive skills. These are kind of like your raw materials, the bricks and mortar of the language. We're talking grammar, vocabulary, pronunciation, all that good stuff. But here's the thing. Just because you have a pile of bricks doesn't mean you can build a house. That's where the other half comes in, your interactive skills. This is all about what you do with those materials in real time. Can you take turns in a conversation? Can you respond to what someone just said? Do you know how to ask for clarification? This is the huge difference between just knowing a language and actually using it with another human being.
Okay, so to make sure a test is actually measuring both of those things properly, designers can't just wing it. They have to follow a pretty strict set of rules. Think of them as 4 principles that every good speaking test absolutely has to follow.
First up, and honestly, this is the big one, is validity. It asks a very simple, very direct question. Is this test measuring what it says it's measuring? So if a test claims it assesses your ability to negotiate a deal, but the task is just to describe a picture of a cat, well, it lacks validity. And a score from a test that isn't valid, it's pretty much meaningless. Next is reliability. A test has to give consistent results. Imagine you get a great score on Monday, but you take the exact same test on Tuesday and you totally bomb. That's an unreliable test. The score you get should be stable. It shouldn't matter if it's examiner A or examiner B grading you this week or next week. Without reliability, the score is just noise.
Then we've got authenticity. This one is all about how much the test feels like real life. A super authentic task might be something like solving a real problem with a partner, something you might actually do. A less authentic task feels weird, artificial, something you'd never ever do outside of that exam room. And the more authentic a test is, the better it can predict how you'll do in the real world.
And finally, we have the reality check, practicality. You could design the most valid, reliable, and authentic test in the history of the world, but if it takes 5 hours to run and you need 3 highly trained experts for every single person, well, it's just not going to happen. A test has to actually be doable in the real world, with all its limits on time, money, and people. So, with those 4 principles in mind, let's open up the assessor's toolkit. Test designers have a bunch of different tasks they can use, and kind of like a mechanic, they have to pick the right tool for the specific job they're trying to do. Let's take a look at 5 of the most common tools in the box.
First up is the classic, the one we've probably all had to do at some point, the one-on-one interview. You know the drill. An examiner sits across from you and asks you a bunch of questions.
So what's good about it? Well, its main strength is control. It's really easy to standardize, so you can make sure every candidate gets a pretty similar experience. But, and this is a big but, that control is also its weakness. The examiner is totally in charge, which can feel really unnatural. It doesn't really test your ability to manage a real two-way conversation where you also have to ask questions or take the lead. Next in the toolkit is the monologue. This is basically any task where you're asked to just talk all by yourself for a good stretch of time. Think giving a short presentation or describing a really complicated picture. This tool is fantastic for checking out those productive skills we mentioned earlier. How well can you organize your thoughts? Can you use complex sentences? Can you speak fluently on your own? The downside, though, is a huge one. There's basically zero interaction. It's a speech, not a conversation.
Now, our third tool tries to get a lot closer to real life, the role play. For this, you get a scenario, like maybe you have to complain about a faulty product you bought, or you have to make plans with a coworker, and you have to act out your part.
And this is where we see a big jump in authenticity. It just feels a lot more like a real situation, and it puts the focus squarely on interaction. The challenge here? Your performance can really depend on how familiar or comfortable you feel in that specific role. And for the person scoring it, trying to judge a simulated conversation like that can get incredibly complicated. The fourth tool puts you in a room with other test takers, the group discussion. You and one or more other people are given a topic or a problem, and you have to discuss it or solve it together.
This task can give assessors amazing, rich data about your real interaction skills that other tasks just can't capture. But it has this one major vulnerability called partner effects. What does that mean? Well, if you get stuck with a really dominant partner who talks over you, or a really quiet partner who forces you to do all the work, your score could be affected, and it might not even be your fault.
And our final tool is often the most complex one of all, the integrated task. This is where you have to combine your skills. For example, you might read a short article or listen to a mini lecture, and then you have to summarize it and give your opinion on it out loud.
You see these tasks a lot in academic and professional tests because, well, they mirror what you actually have to do at school or at work. They're great for seeing if you can synthesize information. The risk, the cognitive load is super high, and if the reading or listening part is too tough, the test might end up measuring your comprehension skills instead of your speaking skills.
So, why does knowing about all these different tools matter so much? Because the choice of tool directly, and I mean directly, shapes what's being measured, and that ultimately shapes the score you get.
Look, here's the bottom line. The task dictates the grading. It's that simple. If a test designer picks a solo task, like a presentation, the scoring is naturally going to focus on your individual skills, your fluency, your grammar, your structure. But if they choose an interactive task, like a discussion, then the scoring has to shift to prioritize how well you interact, things like taking turns, responding to others, and working together.
And this is where it can get really tricky, because designers have to watch out for some common traps. For example, a role play that's so scripted it feels completely fake and doesn't test how you handle unexpected turns. Or a group discussion that just rewards the loudest, most confident person instead of the most thoughtful one. Topics themselves can be culturally biased too. A task about a specific holiday might be a piece of cake for one person and impossible for another. But probably the biggest trap is a mismatch. Using a great interactive task, but then only grading for individual grammar and vocabulary and completely ignoring the interaction you were asked to do.
So this brings us all the way back to the beginning. Now that you've seen the tools in the toolkit, which one do you think really gets closest to capturing real-world speaking? Is it the interview, the role play, the group discussion? The truth is, there's no single perfect tool. Every single one involves trade-offs between those four big principles: validity, reliability, authenticity, and practicality. The real takeaway here is that behind every speaking test is this whole world of complex design choices, all trying to solve that one central puzzle. How in the world do you fairly grade a conversation?